My pleasure to introduce our next session. This session is titled Exploring Intersecting Identities, How to Find Your Place in College as a Queer Disabled Student. And it's my pleasure to introduce our guest today is Hannah Crooks. Hannah is an undergraduate student working for the Diversity and Inclusion Student Commons, or DISC, here at Montana State University, with a focus on supporting students with disabilities. She is passionate about making Montana State University accessible and building community on campus. Working outside of work, she is majoring in organismal biology and is the president of OSTEM, that is Out in STEM, here at Montana State University. Hannah, great to have you today.
Thank you so much, Paul. Hello. So yes, my name is Hannah. Welcome to Exploring Intersecting Identities. And I'm going to go ahead and jump right on in. So a little bit about me. I feel like it's always helpful to make this personal and talk about ourselves. And I also love talking about myself and what I do. So I'm a second-year student here at Montana State University. My major is organismal biology. And I always feel like I need to explain this because I think it's a stranger biology. So I love looking at biology from the context of looking at a species or an animal as a whole, not an ecosystem, because that would be ecology, and not at the cell level, because that would be cellular biology. So I like that middle ground. So outside of school, I work as a student coordinator for the Diversity and Inclusion Student Commons here. And so we're an office on campus that specializes in supporting students with marginalized identity. So we do a lot of work with LGBTQ+ students. I focus on ability status. So a lot of the work that I try to do brings that into the mix. So my coworkers work on race and ethnicity, socioeconomic status. We're really here for anyone with a marginalized identity. A little bit more about me. I'm actually from New Hampshire. So I moved out to Bozeman 2 years ago across the country, and I love it out here. I became disabled, so I am disabled. I guess that's important to talk about. I became disabled at the age of 14 due to chronic Lyme disease. So I talk a lot about my experience as a unique one because I wasn't born disabled. So I had a period in my life where I didn't really know anyone with a disability. I wasn't disabled. And then waking up disabled, almost literally, was a really life-changing experience for me. And I like to say that it makes me relatable and that I can talk about what it's like to not know what the disability community goes through. And I can also be an advocate for the disability community as a part of it. And finally, as a fun fact, my partner and I have a dog, Pond, and 3 cats. That's Blue, Lyra, and Tonks, like the character from Harry Potter. So the first thing I love to talk about when I do presentations is group norms. So I would love for you guys to interact. I want questions. Please engage. And to do that, I want to set some basic ground rules a little bit and guidelines. And the first is to always use I statements. When we use, and I'm going to use a bunch of we statements to explain this. When we use we statements, we typically generalize. And so when we use I statements, it focuses on our experience. I want to hear your experiences. I want to hear your opinions. I want to hear your life, not what we assume or generalize to other people. So to keep this a really productive space, I like to encourage everyone to use I statements as much as you can. I know it can be difficult at first. The second is the right to pass. If I ever ask a question or look for engagement and you don't want to engage, don't feel like you have to. I won't take it personally. I would love for you to engage, but I also respect the right that you don't want to. 3 is that every question is important. Please ask all of your questions. I'm here to answer any question, no matter how basic you may think it is. I'm sure that someone else here has it. I know that's really cliche, but it's very true. So please ask every question that you have. I'm here to be a resource. 4, step out if you need. If at any point this gets upsetting or overwhelming, or, I don't intend for it to be, but if it becomes that way for you, please feel the right to step away from your computer, leave the meeting, whatever makes you feel safe. Take care of yourself first. And 5 is confidentiality. I know this is a little strange with this being recorded, but please, take the learning from this out and leave the names or the people that ask specific questions here. We want this to be about taking learning and education, not necessarily being like, oh, so-and-so said this, if that helps. Is there anything else anyone would like to add, or anything that I can do that can make people feel safe? Or is there any accessibility needs anyone has that I could accommodate? Okay, I'm going to take that as a no. If at any time that changes, please feel free to message in the chat, unmute yourself, or direct message me too if that makes you feel comfortable. All right, so let's talk about what is ability status. So ability status is an aspect of everyone's identity regarding if they have a disability, and if so, what their disability's impact is. So when I came to college, I was like, why is everyone calling it ability status, not just, disability? And because ability status makes it relatable for everyone. We all have an ability status. If you don't have a disability, that is your ability status, if that makes sense. So it's a part of everyone's identity. And then it also brings the focus on the fact that having a diagnosis or having a specific disability is going to have very different impacts for different people. So we want to focus on what the impact of someone's disability is rather than what do we title it or anything like that. Again, it's making it individual and talking about individual life experiences. So what's a disability? I know that many people in the audience may know what that is, but I want to refresh that so that if anyone doesn't know, we address that. So a disability is defined by the Americans with Disabilities Act, also known as the ADA. It's defined as a person who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activity. That can mean a lot of things. So we break that down into a couple of major categories of disabilities: learning, physical, psychiatric, visually or hearingly impaired, and other. So a learning disability is something that impacts someone in the classroom and impacts their ability to learn in a traditional format. So we think of dyslexia as a really common example for this. When someone struggles to learn to read in a traditional manner, they have to be given outside tools that help them do that. And there's many more than just the example I'm going to give for each of these, but I think it can be helpful to throw out a common name or a common diagnosis that falls in these categories. Next is physical. And so that's when someone's physical body limits them from doing something in, I'm going to say physical a lot of times, a physical way. And so a really common example of that is someone who's in a wheelchair. That would be a physical disability. If someone has a spinal cord injury, they may not be able to walk, and it limits their physical ability to do a task in that capacity. Then there's psychiatric disabilities, and these are usually common or mental health disorders or conditions that have now become to the point that they substantially limit one or more major life function. So depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, any of these conditions can be debilitating and can be a disability. And this is where I like to stop to note that just because someone has a condition that traditionally would fall into a category that could be a disability, like mental health conditions, it doesn't mean they are. So I think there's two parts to this. One, to be a disability, it has to limit one or more major life activity. And two, the person has to identify as disabled. I think it's really crucial to remember that people can choose to not identify as disabled, and that's okay. So then there's visually or hearing impaired. So this is where we typically think of deaf or blind people. And this is where people commonly ask me, well, why isn't that a physical disability? We pull it out because the deaf community and the blind community have really strong cultures that don't always regard their condition as a disability. So we don't want to force someone to use terminology they don't feel comfortable with, and we don't want to force someone to identify as disabled or identify as a specific type of disability if they don't want to. And that's why we have other. And so that's, there are many conditions and disabilities that may fall in multiple categories, or that people don't want to identify with a specific category. So it's important to remember that people can identify how they wish to, and we don't want to ever force a label on someone. So the other is a great catch-all where people can identify how they choose to. And I think that's really common in the LGBTQ plus community too, where we don't want to force a label on anyone. It's the same kind of concept of letting people identify as they want to. So then talking about education. So in education, we have things called accommodations. And the University of Washington had a great definition for that. And they define it as an alteration of environment, curriculum, format, or equipment that allows an individual with a disability to gain access to content and or complete assigned tasks. Basically, an accommodation is anything that allows a disabled student to succeed in the classroom. That can be bigger print tests if they have issues seeing. It can be the ability to test in a quiet testing center if they struggle with testing in a large classroom environment. This is really common with ADHD. Anything like that. It can be simply as saying, okay, they're going to use the lab bench that is a little lower for people in wheelchairs so they can safely access a chem lab. It can be any number of these things, and there's so many more. So then I'm going to move on from there unless there's any questions. I want to stop here because I know there usually is questions. So I'll give space for that for a second here. Okay. Again, if you have any questions at any point, please feel free to stop me. I know this is a lot of content I'm throwing. So disabilities are common. I want to really drive this home. Disabilities are really, really common, and students with disabilities are really common. So talking about the LGBTQ plus community specifically, 40% of trans adults identify with having a disability. That's 4 in 10 people, that's 2 in 5 people. I mean, that's a really large number of people. And 40% of bisexual men also identify with having a disability. Again, it's really common. You know, disabled students are unique in what they may need, but it doesn't mean that they are uncommon. And I want to normalize that. 30% of bisexual and lesbian women also identify with having a disability, and 27.2% of the general population identifies with having a disability. That's really important to know. That's over 1 in 4 people. So again, I don't ever want disabled students to feel as though, you know, there's no one like me or no one's ever done this, because there are a lot of people who are like you and a lot of people who have your back. And so at Montana State University, we did this 2018 campus climate survey, and they basically surveyed all students at MSU, and they sent out the survey and they said, fill it out, tell us who you identify. We tracked factors like LGBTQ plus people. I think that was 25%. Came back saying that 25% of our student body identifies as LGBTQ plus. We tracked race and ethnicity. We tracked socioeconomic status. We basically asked people to identify a bunch of factors. And one of those is disability. And it was found that 27% of MSU students identify with having a disability. And so I'm going to talk a lot about what MSU does in our school, but no, this is something you can look at other universities. Ask what percentage of their students identify with having a disability. Ask what percentage receive accommodations. You know, these are really common statistics that schools will have. So I'm going to give you a lot of examples that are specific to my university because that's where I specialize in. But know that these are things you can look for at every university and things that you should ask about when looking at colleges. So talking about college. College poses a lot of challenges, and I don't mean for this to get overwhelming, but there are a lot of challenges to college. And it's a really rewarding experience, and I highly advocate that anyone who wants to go to college should do so. But I think it's also important to be prepared for challenges. And so there are some general challenges. This is what I like to identify as challenges that pretty much every student will go through in some capacity. That can be learning how to live independently from family. You now get to choose when you go to bed, when you eat dinner, what you eat for dinner. You know, that's a whole change in the way that you live. Another is making friends and finding affinity spaces. So when we talk about LGBTQ plus students particularly, finding that space that's for you, it can be a challenge. It can be hard to make friends. You know, I moved across the country. I didn't know, well, 2 people from my high school went here, but I really didn't see them in college. I didn't know anyone. It can be hard to make friends. It can be hard to find spaces where I felt like I really fit in and were affinity spaces. And it's worthwhile once you do so. And it's totally doable, but it is something you have to figure out. Another one is adjusting to college academics. College is a little harder than high school. I argue that it's harder in a different way. It's not as structured, and that can be challenging, but it is very different from high school. So adjusting, that first semester is a lot of just adjusting. So this is how college works. This is how I work. This is how I study best. And every student, regardless of whether they have a disability or LGBTQ plus or not, are gonna face these challenges. And there's plenty more. I didn't love the dining hall food some days, and learning how I could cook in a microwave, challenges that I faced. So just being prepared for those. And then there's unique challenges that face LGBTQ plus disabled students and disabled students generally. There's accessibility. It's learning how to get into a classroom, how to get accommodations, how do I talk to professors about my disability, learning that specific challenge. And then finding community. It's again, finding those affinity spaces as an LGBTQ plus person and as a disabled person. So it's just another layer of challenges that you kind of have to be prepared for. So meeting the challenges. The great news is that universities work really, really hard to meet these challenges. They want students to succeed. They want great retention rates. They want you to do well here and find places. And so I often say that sometimes it's not always that a college lacks resources. They just can be a little challenging to find. You kind of have to figure out how to find those resources, who to talk to, that kind of thing. So these are my 4 main categories that I tell students to look for. And I advocate that you look for these before you come to college, and then also when you get here. And the first is student organizations. Look for a queer straight alliance. We have a QSA here on campus. This can be called a GSA, LGBTQ plus space. I mean, there's lots of names that this can be. We use the term GSA or QSA here. But look for those spaces. Look for people who have identities like you as an LGBTQ plus person and as a disabled person. So we also have OSTEM. I am the president for this club here, and it's an out in STEM club, and we focus on supporting students with LGBTQ plus identities who are in STEM. And there's many more. So one thing that I'm gonna be honest, that Montana State lacks is we don't have any clubs or affinity spaces for disabled students that I'm aware of. But look for that. Other colleges definitely do. I'm not to say that MSU doesn't have spaces. My office is a space. I mean, there are spaces, but we don't have any student organizations specifically. So look for that. If you're like, when you sit down to pick what college you want, or if you're thinking about transferring or any number of reasons you're looking for a college, look and see what they have. Do they have the spaces that I want? Is it really important to me that they have a specific space for disabled students, or am I okay being supported as an LGBTQ plus student, or am I okay being supported in different ways? So think about that. That's a personal question. What do I need for support, and what do I want out of affinity spaces? So student organizations create peer support and connection, and that's really important. And I advocate that we need this little bottom row on all these little boxes. To be really successful in college, you need a little bit of everything. So you need peer support. You need those friends. You need that connection, and it can be really challenging, especially in a pandemic. But it's really important that you have 1 or 2 people minimum that you can talk to who are your age or in the same space in life that you can relate to. And that doesn't always mean they have to have the same identities as you, but sometimes it can be really nice to go into a space and be like, okay, in this space, I know that no one's going to judge me for being LGBTQ plus or judge me for being disabled. That can be really nice. In addition to everything else, I advocate strongly that no one is just one identity, and you want to find support for all of your identities. So what else? What do colleges do? They have offices for diversity and inclusion. So these look different college to college. The name will be different college to college. At MSU, we have 2 different offices. We have the Diversity and Inclusion Student Commons, and we have an office for diversity and inclusion. So for us, we have 2 separate offices. One, the Student Commons, focuses on student experiences, and this is where I work. So I work with students. I work on making sure student experiences are great. I do programming to make sure that students have connection opportunities and that end. So I really focus on student support. And then we have a second office, the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, that focuses on academics. It focuses on faculty. So my boss's boss, 2 rows up here, she works with our faculty to make sure that there is education on diverse topics and diversity here. She's a great advocate. If I ever had a problem, I needed support that was, academically related or faculty related, she's a great resource. They do a lot of training, again, focusing on the faculty in the hopes that we're supporting faculty so that they're aware and they have education, and we support students as well so that they are successful. And I strongly advocate for when you're looking for a college, look for both. Having one office that does it all can be really productive. It also may not have as much support. So as a student, look for both. You want your faculty to be trained and to be aware of issues you could be facing, or identities, or language they should and shouldn't use. But you also want support as a student. Our office puts on this retreat. We call it Queer Frontier. And so students get to go out into nature and do all kinds of things. So I went rafting my third week of college, which was super fun. And I got to meet a bunch of other LGBTQ plus students. So you want those opportunities. And beyond the opportunities, these offices also provide resources and support. So again, if you ever had a problem, you now have someone you can talk to about kind of, well, this was said in class and I was uncomfortable. Or I don't know how to talk to my professor about XYZ. We also have resources. Resources can be hard to find. So if you can find an office like this, they usually have all kinds of like lists pre-done for you. They can be like, yeah, we know some doctors in the area that are really good about LGBTQ plus identities. We know some clubs on campus. We know employers that are really accepting, and this is about disabled students, but also about LGBTQ plus. And any other identity you may have. They're here to support all identities, so they'll have resources for any identity you have, most likely. And then there's an Office for Disability Services. So we have the Office of Disability Services, and these are your people that are going to get you those accommodations. These are the people that know what they can legally provide you, how to get that. They're going to help you get what you need in the classroom in terms of what you need for accommodations and academic support. And I always like to stop here and say that not every disabled student has accommodations. I don't personally, but I do advocate that if students, you have a 504 in high school, you have an IEP, and you're like, I don't know if I want to bring it over, try to. It's important to at least, have the accommodations. If you don't use them, you don't have to. But I always advocate that students at least go meet with the office and find out what accommodations would be an option for them and what they can do. It's a lot easier if you get ahead of it and you have your accommodations and you're like, oh, I have extended time on tests, and you go and you do this the first test and you're like, I really didn't need the extended time. It's better to have it than to fail 2 or 3 exams and be like, oh, I really needed this accommodation. And it's a lot easier to get it in advance. These are really great people, and they are federally funded. And this is something that I didn't know when I first came to college, is that the US government actually decides what accommodations are approved for federal schools. And so they have a list for, basically, depending on your diagnosis, they can approve, whatever accommodations the US government has said you can approve these. And that limits them a little bit. But if they were to approve things that aren't approved, it can actually jeopardize the accreditation of the school. So sometimes these offices get a bad rap where they're like, oh, they didn't approve my accommodations, they're just mean. That's not the case at all. They genuinely want to approve everything they can, but their hands are tied a little bit. So it's important to know that. So these offices provide accommodations. That's the main thing they do. They also do a lot of academic support. They can connect you with tutoring or study habits. They have a lot of these tools ready to go for you. And they also have resources. So they often will refer you back to student organizations or the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. Usually these 3 offices will refer you to each other, or 3 sets of organizations will. But in case you missed any or didn't know about some, or one list is a little more comprehensive than the other, it's great to get it from all of them. And I also recommend that students, when you're thinking about going to a college, when you tour, you can request to meet with the Office of Disability Services and they can talk to you. So I actually met with them before I showed up here. And it was great to know that, where the office is and who they are and what I can have. And finally, there's other offices and support systems on campus. So these are usually not identity specific, and they're for all students. So here at MSU, we have counseling and psychological services. Being disabled, being LGBTQ+ can be hard. It provides those unique challenges, and sometimes it can be really helpful just to have someone to talk to. So we offer free counseling for students. So know about resources like that. You never have to use it, but it's good to know about it. We have dialogue spaces. This is where we have students come in and talk about their experiences, and bringing in people from many different backgrounds. It's a great connection space. It's a great way to meet other students too. There's departmental support. Some departments will reach out, and I'm in a great department. I love my department. I'm with ecology, and they send emails all the time about opportunities and people to connect to. So look out for that. Look for your department's support. Get on their email list. They'll have things for you. there's so many more. There's many resources on campus. We have an Office of Health Advancement. We have a Women's Center. Whatever you may need, they probably have an office or student body representative for it, whether it's a student organization or a service. So look for those too. Again, some of these you may never use, but it's good to know they exist. These other offices and support systems will provide resources, support, community and connection, and opportunities in that kind of ballpark. So how do you do this? I know going to college can be really overwhelming. It feels like there's a lot of things you have to worry about and think about, and it can be a lot. So here are my 5 tips that I think really helped me when I was a senior in high school and a junior too. And the first thing is to do some research. Look up your college choices. If you're like, oh, I'm really interested in Montana State or Duke or wherever you want to go, look them up and dig through their website, see what they have for resources, see what they're advertising, see what they're talking about. That'll tell you a lot about how accepting they are for LGBTQ+ students, for disabled students, again, for any identity. Do some digging. And if it's really hard to find, that might also tell you that they're not super publicizing it, which means they may not super support it. So look for those schools that are like, yes, this is what we're doing, and plaster it everywhere. Look at college rankings. I was just in a panel an hour before, and John Paxton mentioned this, and I think it's very true. So I included the link to Campus Pride Index. They're a great one for LGBTQ+. They rank every single school about, do they have opportunities for LGBTQ+ students? Do they have research? Do they have, gender neutral housing? So they're specific for LGBTQ+ students, but there are lists for schools about accommodations as well. So look them up, see what people are saying. The next part is be preemptive. Look for those resources and accommodations prior to coming to campus. Sometimes you have to have documentation from high school to get accommodations. Sometimes there's a lot of loops and hoops you have to jump through. It can be a lot, and sometimes it can be really helpful to do it right after you graduate, but before you come to college, because you have those like 3 months in the summer where you're not necessarily doing a lot of things. I mean, you may be working and doing other things, but they're probably less busy than, when you were in school. Do the time then, find out what you have to do and start the process, because it can be a lot. It also can be super easy, but it can be a lot. And look for those resources. It can be really helpful to be like, okay, I'm going to show up to campus and I'm going to go find these 3 clubs. I'm really excited about these clubs. I'm going to find out when they meet. I'm going to show up. It's going to be great. I always get a little anxious, and I remember being anxious when I came to college, where I was like, I don't know how to do this and I don't know how to do that. And doing this really helped me a little bit, or at least it was a starting point for me. Be your own best advocate. College is a little different than high school, especially bigger schools. It can be a little bit of, sometimes you get lost in the weeds. So it's important to know that you have to advocate for yourself. If someone doesn't email you back for a week, send a prompt email. No one's ever going to be offended by that. They may have just misplaced your email. Advocate for your needs academically and socially. It's okay to say, hey, I can't find any spaces for XYZ people. How do I find those? And keep asking. I know that it can be really tiring, and it can be one more thing you have to do, but trust me, the payoff is completely worth it. And find your spaces. Try out clubs. No one told me this, but I went my first day, they had this fair, and they were like, here's all the clubs, and they all lined up, and there's like hundreds of clubs. And I signed up for like, I'm not kidding, probably about 20 or 30 clubs, and I still get emails for them now. But I went to a couple of them, and I was like, you're not really a fit for me. And that's okay. You don't have to get involved with every club. Find the clubs that you really feel like a fit. And you usually feel that fit pretty early on too, So do what makes you happy. See where it fits. And look for research. Especially for students in STEM, I argue this heavily, look for research. You're gonna have to email a bunch of professors to get research. That's pretty much the nature of it. Get a form email down, get ready, and start sending out that email. It's always okay to email 10 professors, and if all 10 professors come back and say, oh yeah, we'd love to have you in our lab, be like, actually, I really want to go with so-and-so, and be like, oh, I'm really sorry, I actually decided to go a different direction. That's okay. But expect that not everywhere is going to be a fit, and that you're gonna have to try out a bunch of places. So be prepared for that. And finally, reach out. Ask for help, ask for resources. I mean, again, it's going back to being your advocate. Keep asking people and ask different people. I've switched departments 4 times in my time here at MSU before settling on the major that I'm in. And every single advisor I've had has said something completely different to me about resources and whatnot. So it's been really helpful, again, to ask a bunch of people because everyone knows a little bit. And when you put all those pieces together, you have a really good picture. All right, so I'm going to open this up to questions because I know this can be a lot. I also left my name, my email. Please, even if you decide you don't want to go to MSU, I will not be heartbroken. Email me, ask me questions. I went through this. I have so much knowledge about this and I'd love to help you and I can connect you. If I don't know, I know people that will probably know the answer to your questions. If you are interested in MSU or you're interested in what my office does, that's our email, thediversity@montana.edu. We're here to support you. Again, even if you decide MSU is not the school for you, we want to give you resources. We want to help you. And that's our website. Come see what we're doing. You know, even if you decided, oh, I'm going to go another direction. Again, I keep advocating. If you're going to go somewhere else, it's okay. Come see what we're doing. See what names of programs we have, resources, how we're doing it, and see what other colleges are doing too. It can be hard to find these resources sometimes. So sometimes knowing like, oh, the buzzword for this is this, you know, sometimes searching disability won't get you the student resources you want. It'll get you just that main office, and searching diversity will get you that resource. Sometimes it's just knowing that word choice to use. All right, so I want to open the questions. I know there's a lot. Ask me whatever you want to ask. All right, John says, is there some source to evaluate how disability-friendly a campus is similar to Campus Pride? There's not quite as streamlined a list. I'm going to be completely honest there. Campus Pride is really good, and there hasn't really been one for disability. I would Google it. Google the college name that you're interested in and see what people are saying about it. Look for reviews. Students will often post online what they're saying and what their experiences are, and listen to those. I think if you do Google it, some of the major colleges will be ranked, but some of the smaller colleges, even Montana State, I think isn't ranked. So it just depends on what college you're looking for too. I hope that helped. Liz says, are there any good resources / trainings for high school counselors that could train them on helping LGBTQ plus students / disabled students get these resources in college? The short answer is yes, but it can be challenging to find. So if you're in Montana, please come check out the Diversity and Inclusion Student Commons. We do trainings all the time. We do something called Safe Zone, and this is a 3-part module. It's 3 different trainings that talk about LGBTQ plus experiences and challenges. And it's through our HR department, but anyone can register. So right now they're all online because of the pandemic, but we actually just finished as the school year is ending. But I'm not sure what format they'll be in next year. So if they are online, please, no matter where you are in the country, feel free to register for that. That's something that we offer, and we'll talk about resources, tips, and connect you with some great people on campus, in our campus, that will talk about common things you can do. But colleges all around the country do stuff like this. Our program was actually developed based off of other colleges' programs. As a person who makes programming, I love doing that, where I'm like, oh, Michigan State's doing this really well. I'm going to steal their program and adapt it a little bit for our college and use it. And we love to give that to other people as well. So look at colleges around you. Talk to HR departments in colleges too. They usually have trainings that are aimed at faculty and students, but they can definitely expand that out beyond into the community. And then email diversity offices. Colleges will email you back, and we love to recruit students. So we are very happy to send those resources too. So if you're like, oh, a bunch of my students, I'm from New Hampshire, majority of my high school class wanted to go to the University of New Hampshire. So if you are a college counselor and you're like, oh, a bunch of my students really want to go to this university, email them and be like, hey, I'm a high school counselor. A bunch of my students want to come there. These are commonly asked questions I have. What do you got for me? They will send you pamphlets and resources, and we're happy to help. So feel free to reach out to colleges near you. That's the best advice I can give. We do trainings, we do all that. And sometimes, again, it's not always publicized, but emailing them or talking to HR in those universities can be really helpful. I hope that was helpful. Are there any more questions? Any follow-up questions? I know I just raced through those. Paul says, what is the best advice that you have received from a professor about classes? The best advice. I actually got that from my organic chemistry professor this semester, and he told me to always assume the professors are here to help you. Ask for help. Professors usually are really, really nice. They're here to help you. And he was like, come talk to me, and of course I'll be honest, I struggle in organic chemistry. It's not easy. And he was like, why didn't you come to me sooner? And I was like, well, I'm scared. I was afraid you'd judge me for not doing well in your class, or I was afraid, no one had, again, I was like, no one has ever failed organic chemistry, and plenty of people struggle in organic chemistry. And he was like, just assume that they're here to help you. Most professors go to their office hours, email them, they're happy to help you. Not to say there aren't professors that are a little more stubborn or difficult, but email. 99% of the time, they're really, really nice, even if you wouldn't have always assumed they were. Any other questions? Okay. Well, if there's no more questions, I'm gonna call that a wrap. I am one of those people that I go home and think of questions. Please email me. I'm happy to help you. I am a resource. Anything that I can do to help you, please shoot me an email. I'm here for you. Or shoot my office an email. They're happy to help too.